Susan was very shy and wanted to be home with her family, whereas Prue was a black belt in gregariousness and was never home. She was always at a friend's house. Mickey was born in 1956, and we really didn't have a separate room, and he slept kind of on a landing on the third floor until Jill went to college. Then he had a bedroom. They were all fun. I made it a point, even if I was in New York, to be home for dinner. I knew there was a time in my teens when I didn't want to be with my parents anymore, and I figured that I would enjoy them while they were still interested in me. I was a tough taskmaster. I sent Prue to her room because she wouldn't eat whatever we were serving. But we had good conversations, and we had an unabridged dictionary in the dining room. I sent them to look up anything that they didn't know. I played word games with all the kids. Not that long ago, Prue and Jeff were invited to a dinner party. The hostess announced that after dinner they would play charades. Jeff Gershman, Prue's husband, said, "Oh, no, you don't want to do that. Prue will wipe us up." They did proceed, and she did wipe them up. And somebody asked, "How did you get so good at this, Prue?" She said, "Growing up in my house, you either figured it out or die." I was designing fabrics, coloring fabrics. And one night Mickey came up and was watching me, and I was finishing eating a tangerine. And I asked him to go downstairs and bring me up another tangerine. And Mickey came back up with an orange. And I explained to him that an orange was rounder than a tangerine, that the skin was less orange than a tangerine, even though an orange was called an orange. And the skin of each fruit had a different texture. I said, "Now go down and get me a tangerine." So he got to the door, and he came back. He said, "You better give me a swatch of that tangerine." At Eagle, in the first years, it was really boring, and there's no creativity, no outlet for whatever creativity I had until the middle 1950s, and decided to spend money on advertising. I had read 2 ads in the New Yorker, which were 90% copy, and Howard Gossage wrote it. I wrote Howard Gossage a letter, actually referring to ads that he had written, and he wrote me back and said, "If we could make shirts like you write letters, we'd put you out of business." We gave him a contract, and he came to New York with the shirt kerchief ad. And the shirt kerchief ad was a handkerchief with a buttonhole in one corner, and you buttoned it to your shirt. And the idea came from napkins that they were giving out on airplanes at the time. Just write in and we'll send you your very own shirt kerchief. Write and give us a use for the shirt kerchief, for the pocket in the shirt kerchief. Ran one time in the New Yorker, and 13,200 people wrote in, which was 3% of the New Yorker's readership, which meant that everybody who read it intended to write in, but 3% got around to it. They suggested putting salt in it, so when you're eating celery, you could dip it in the pocket. Oh, Mary Louise answered all the letters. She told me that the letters we had received were good enough to be a book. And so I edited them and sorted them into categories and turned it into a book with a preface by Gossage about advertising in the New Yorker in particular. And Macmillan published it. And it was called Dear Miss Afflerbach, or The Postman Rarely Rings. I think it was 11,240 at the time, but they continued to come in after that. The Afflerbach campaign in the New Yorker, it also ran in the Sunday New York Times Magazine and some in Playboy. And it made Eagle and Gant the survivors in the traditional shirt business. I discovered the creativity in designing the fabrics and in the advertising. I considered myself my best customer. When I got tired of whatever we were doing in shirts, I knew that the retailer would get tired of it 6 months later and the consumer 6 months after that. I think my most creative years in the traditional shirt business were in the 60s. And by 1967, I was tired of Ivy League traditional. And I started doing things with fabrics that would never have been traditional. Frank Simon, who was the vice president of menswear at Bloomingdale's, told me to go to Paris and get the Pierre Cardin license for the United States. By the late 1970s, I was tired of designer shirts. I was tired of wearing them, and I was wearing them. And I retired, or thought I retired. For a year and a half, I taught myself to cook, and I worked on landscaping the house we now owned in Spinnerstown. We bought this house in 1980. I've never been happier with any residence than I have with this. So this is my library. This is my museum. I had the OED. I had the London Times Atlas. I had Encyclopedia Britannica. Now I can find anything I want to know much faster on the internet. The first thing I started to collect was scales, only because I'm a Libra. I truly fit the classic description of a Libra. I mean, I like balance. I mean, Anywhere you look, there's two. There's a chair there and a chair there. There's a painting by Simbry there. There's a painting by Simbry there. There's a John Sem there. There's a John Sem there. So that kind of balance is really part of my makeup. Mary Louise and I started going to Europe when we got the Cardin license to buy fabric. We planned our trips. It would be a two-week buying trip, but we managed to spend 2 weekends in some major city in Europe where we had never been. Stockholm or Oslo or Copenhagen or Rome. We saw them all. And our usual trip was London, Paris, Milan, and the Lake Como region. We were in Zurich, and in an antique store, there was a solid brass iron about this big. I did appreciate the aesthetics of a lot of the irons, a combination of brass and steel, the cutouts in the French and Dutch irons, and started buying them. And I didn't buy an iron just because I didn't have it or because it was different. It had to appeal to me and aesthetically. We learned to appreciate wine for the first time on those trips. At one time, we had 2,000 half bottles of wine in our cellar and maybe 100 or so full bottles. You could go down and count them. We collected mostly Bordeaux. If I had it to do over again, I would buy equal amounts of Rhone wines, which are the Syrah grape, naturally peppery. I was home every night for dinner because I wanted to enjoy my kids while they still enjoyed me. I think the result of that was that we never stopped enjoying one another. For 9 years, we gathered the entire family for Thanksgiving or Christmas, sometimes in Spinnerstown, sometimes at La Jolla Beach and Country Club in California, sometimes Captiva in Florida. And I think the great product of those vacations was the ability of far-flung cousins to really bond and become best friends, even though the rest of the year they lived thousands of miles apart. And that was the payoff. I might add, it also enabled us to become close to our grandchildren and them to us. And we really have great relationships with all of them. I think I've had a great life, great family, great friends.